History of Singapore, the Lion City's epic journey. Mythic beginnings. Long before skyscrapers pierced the sky, the island now called Singapore lived in legend. Local lore tells of 1299, when a prince named Sang Nila Utama, driven ashore by a storm, glimpsed what he believed was a lion. Taking this as an auspicious sign, he founded a port he named Singapura, the Lion City. In reality, no lions roamed the jungles of Southeast Asia, but the bold image took hold, and Lion City remains Singapore's name and symbol. Before and after the lion's roar, the island, called Temasek in the annals of traders, grew into a busy medieval entrepot. By the 14th century, Temasek had two settlements, Long Yamen, Dragon's Teeth Gate, and the hill settlement Ban Zu, and thrived on regional trade. But when nearby Malacca rose to dominance, Singapore's fortunes waned, and the island faded into obscurity, a set of ruins and quiet harbors recorded by early explorers. Birth of a colony. A new chapter began in 1819, when Sir Stamford Raffles of the British East India Company eyed this strategic jewel at the mouth of the Malacca Strait. He bargained with local Malay rulers to establish a trading post on the island. Under British rule, Singapore was reborn from jungle and swamp into a free port. Planners laid out streets and quays, and ships came in ever greater numbers. In 1824, the Anglo-Dutch Treaty formally made Singapore a crown colony, cementing its place in the British Empire. Against its geographical drawbacks, a tiny island with no hinterland and virtually no natural resources, the new port prospered by attracting traders from China, India, and beyond. By mid-century, Singapore was emerging as one of Asia's great entrepôts, a bustling harbor steaming with commerce. This was the British vision of Singapore, small in size, but global in ambition. Fall and occupation. Yet even an imperial Gibraltar of the East could not escape the fury of war. In late 1941, warplanes and troops struck Malaya's airfields, and by February 1942, Japanese forces had swept down the peninsula. On 15 February 1942, after only a week of desperate fighting, British Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, hoping to hold to the last man, was forced to surrender Singapore to Japan. The Lion City had fallen. Under Japanese occupation, day-to-day life became a nightmare. Harsh military rule replaced British law, and terror stalked the streets. In the spring of 1942, in an operation known as Suk Ching, Japanese troops systematically screened out Chinese men and executed thousands as anti-Japanese elements. Factories and neighborhoods were torn apart by hunger and fear. For 3 long years, this corner of Singapore was a dark crucible of brutality. When the war ended in 1945, the once proud colony was a shattered ruin, its people desperate for peace and self-rule. Unrest and separation. The return of the British did not immediately bring harmony. In the late 1940s and 50s, Singapore roiled with social unrest and political change. Workers in crowded industries agitated for rights, students marched for education, and new political parties clamored for independence. Even a labor dispute could turn deadly. In May 1955, a strike by bus workers at Hock Lee erupted into violence when police moved in. What began as picket lines ended in an angry clash that left 4 people dead and 31 injured. Such events underscored that colonial peace could not simply be restored by nostalgia. Meanwhile, leaders negotiated self-government. Singapore was granted internal autonomy in 1959 under its own constitution and flag. But internal divisions remained. In 1963, Singapore entered the newly formed Federation of Malaysia, seeking economic security and unity. That hope proved fragile. Ethnic and political tensions, particularly between Chinese and Malay communities, boiled over. In the summer of 1964, intercommunal riots shocked the island. Roiling crowds of youths battled in the streets. By one count, at least 23 were killed, and hundreds wounded during those summer riots. The prospect of continued bloodshed and hardship loomed large. Independence and resilience. Against this backdrop of strife, Singapore's leaders decided on a fateful break. On 9 August 1965, Malaysia's parliament voted to expel the island standing before television cameras, a visibly emotional Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew announced that Singapore would become a fully sovereign nation. Singapore had been cast out of Malaysia, but in that moment it was reborn on its own terms. Lee reminded Singaporeans that they must build a nation from scratch. The expulsion felt like an enormous blow. Many inhabitants had expected a fruitful union. Yet Lee and his colleagues turned anxiety into resolve, pledging to make Singapore viable despite its overwhelming odds. Freedom came at a price. The new republic had no natural resources, no fuel, almost no fresh water, limited land. It had a multiracial population still raw from recent conflict. Its defenses were negligible. In 1965, Singapore's GDP per capita was lower than that of many developing countries. But the island's leaders and people believed in a simple truth. Their greatest asset was human talent. Lee Kuan Yew became the personification of this belief. He famously devoted his life to the nation's rebirth, using tremendous foresight to transform Singapore from a third world to a first world country. Many outsiders marveled, calling Singapore's rise an economic miracle. Over the ensuing decades, Singapore's rise defied every expectation. Planners streamlined bureaucracy and crushed corruption. The government invested in housing, education, and clean water. Empty spaces were turned into green parks and lighted boulevards. Foreign investors were welcomed, lured by rule of law and stability. Singapore played to its strengths. It became a hub for shipping. Today the port of Singapore is the world's second busiest for container traffic, for finance, and for air travel. Little by little, the city's skyline and wealth grew. By the 2000s, skyscrapers and grand hotels testified to decades of industry and trade. Today, Singapore's economy is one of the world's most open and pro-business. It boasts the highest per capita income in Asia, by PPP, and ranks among the least corrupt countries. Its people enjoy a quality of life undreamt of in the 1960s. Nearly every family lives in a modern high-rise flat or condominium. Efficient transport and world-class education are the norms. But none of this erases the memories of hardship. Singaporeans still tell of buildings bombed in 1942, of families torn apart by riots, and of the tense summer the country suddenly stood alone. Each generation has passed on stories of the hard lessons learned in those dark years. From the island's mythic lion origin to its modern megacity status, one theme endures: resilience against all odds. Centuries ago, a small port defied fate with a splash of legend. In the 19th century, a colonial outpost defied its tropical obscurity and became a global trade hub. During W. Puit, the people endured conquest and occupation. In the 1960s, they survived communal violence and the shame of expulsion. From these trials, Singapore emerged not just intact but triumphant. Today, the little red dot stands as proof that even the most unlikely places can rise, phoenix-like, when forged by courage and unity. This is Singapore's story, a city born of myth, tempered by fire, and raised to greatness by its own indomitable will. Sources: authoritative histories and archives on Singapore's founding legend, colonial treaties and wartime experience. nwikipedia.org, nwikipedia.org, nlb.gov.sg, National Library and Historical Records on Post-War Unrest and Independence, nlb.gov.sg, n.wikipedia.org, n.wikipedia.org, Economic Data and Analyses of Modern Singapore, n.wikipedia.org, 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 and retrospectives on Lee Kuan Yew's leadership, nlb.gov.sg, propertyguru.com.sg.